Welcome back to Grimverse History, where we uncover the strange and forgotten sides of history. Tonight, we're stepping into ancient Rome to witness a wedding ritual so disturbing that later generations tried to erase it from memory. Marriage is supposed to begin with vows, flowers, and celebration. But in Rome, it once began with fear, with force, with a ritual that looked far more like an abduction than a union of love. You stand at the edge of a narrow Roman street. Torchlight flickers against stone walls worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Before we go further, take a moment. If this story helps you slow down, unwind, or drift towards sleep gently like this video, subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our nightly journeys. It's ancient Rome, not the Rome of marble statues and triumphal arches, but the Rome behind closed doors. The year is 186 BC. In Roman law, marriage transferred a woman from her father's authority to her husband's authority. This transfer was called manu. But here is what the legal texts reveal. Before this transfer could be complete, before a woman could become a wife, she had to be purified. That's the word used in the legal codes. Purificus, purified, a law code from the 12 tables. Rome's foundational legal text includes a provision: no bride of proper Roman family shall enter marriage without purification by the appointed guardians of divine will. Appointed guardians of divine will, that's what they call the priests. The sacred Bonadier, the priests of the good goddess, a fertility cult that existed at the very center of Roman religious practice. Here's what makes this especially sinister. Roman religion was transactional. You gave offerings to gods, gods gave blessings. Simple exchange. But in the case of marriage, the offering wasn't wine or grain or sacrificed animals. The offering was the bride. Think about what that means. You're getting married. You're 16, maybe 17 years old. You've been prepared for this your entire life. You know your duty, but nobody explained this part. Nobody told you that before you belong to your husband. You belong to the gods, and the gods require proof. Archaeological evidence from multiple sites across Rome reveals purpose-built chambers beneath major temples. These aren't burial crypts. They aren't storage rooms. They're chambers with specific features. Stone beds, channels carved into floors for liquid drainage, locking mechanisms on the doors from the outside. In 2003, excavations beneath the Temple of Bonadier on the Aventine Hill revealed one of these chambers completely intact. Inside, inscriptions on the walls, not prayers, not religious texts, names, hundreds of names, all female, all with dates next to them, dates that correspond to recorded Roman wedding celebrations from the same periods. This was where priests claimed the right to consummate the marriage before the husband. The ritual worked like this. After the wedding ceremony, after the public celebration, the bride was escorted to the temple. Not by her husband, he wasn't allowed by female attendants, older women who had undergone the same ritual. Your daughter is taken downstairs into darkness. The air is cold, the walls are stone. She's brought to a door inside a priest or several priests. The philosopher Lucretius, writing in 50 BC, references the practice more directly in a passage that medieval monks try to erase from manuscripts. We only have it from a single surviving copy found in 1417. He writes, "The rituals of Bona are called sacred, but they are terror. What priest claims to offer to gods he takes for himself, and the law protects this theft with the word divine. The law protects this theft with the word divine." Think about the machinery of that system. You're a Roman father. You know this ritual exists. You know your daughter will undergo it, but you can't refuse because it's not abuse, it's religion. It's not assault, it's purification. It's not a crime, it's divine law. The system has built perfect insulation against resistance. Here's what makes this practice especially difficult to document. Roman women who underwent the ritual were legally forbidden from discussing it. Not discouraged, forbidden. The Lex Falconia, a law passed in 169 BC, includes a provision about religious silence. Women who revealed mysteries of the sacred rites could be charged with impiety, punishment, exile, or death. This is why the historical record is so fragmentary. The victims were legally silent, the perpetrators called it sacred, and the only men who wrote history were either participants or beneficiaries of the system. But here's what patriarchy never understands about silencing victims. Silence isn't the same as forgetting, and sometimes people find ways to speak without words. In the years of 1920, archaeologists excavating a villa in Pompeii found a room that had been sealed, not by volcanic ash. It was deliberately walled up before the eruption. Inside, a fresco, it showed a wedding scene, normal Roman iconography, except for one detail, in the background barely visible, a woman being led downstairs by robed figures. Her face turned back, her hand reaching toward a man who wasn't following. The archaeologist who discovered it noted, "The technical skill of this image is remarkable. The hidden woman's face is rendered with more care and detail than the main wedding couple. Someone wanted this remembered. They hid it in a sealed room, hoping it would survive. It did for 2,000 years. Think about the person who painted that. They knew they couldn't speak about the ritual openly. That was illegal. But they could paint it, hide it, hope someone eventually would see. That's not passive acceptance. That's documentation by a survivor who knew the system would try to erase what happened. If this moment in history doesn't disturb you enough to learn more, you might be missing the lesson our ancestors risked everything to preserve." After the ritual, the bride was returned to the wedding celebration. Hours had passed, sometimes a full day. Roman wedding customs included a curious detail that historians long found puzzling. The bride appeared before her new husband wearing a veil called a flammeum. This veil was never removed during the wedding, never. The husband consummated the marriage with his bride still veiled for centuries. Scholars thought this was modesty, Roman virtue, proper behavior. Then feminist historian Amy Richlin analyzed medical texts from the period. Roman physician Soranus, writing in the 2nd century, mentions in a medical treatise that brides often displayed signs of recent injury on their wedding night. He advises, "The veil serves a dual purpose. It preserves modesty, and it prevents the husband from observing evidence of the purification ritual which might cause inappropriate questions." It prevents the husband from observing evidence. Read that again. The veil wasn't modesty. It was covering up evidence of abuse, so the husband wouldn't know his bride had already been assaulted. The entire system was designed to maintain the lie. The bride couldn't speak about it. That was illegal. Physical evidence was concealed. That was custom. And if she showed distress, trauma, fear, that was expected. She was a virgin. Of course, she was frightened. The machinery of silence was perfect. Here's where the historical record becomes explosive. In 186 BC, something happened that threatened to expose the entire system. A Roman woman named Hispalaphisia went to the consul and revealed details about the Manalia, secret religious rituals that had been operating in Rome for decades. Her testimony, recorded by the historian Livy, describes systematic sexual abuse disguised as religious rites, young men and women taken to underground chambers, assaulted by priests, silenced by religious law. The Roman Senate was scandalized. They launched an investigation. They arrested priests. They shut down the Banilia. They executed the leaders. But here is what's interesting. During that investigation, several women tried to bring testimony about the marriage purification ritual. The Senate refused to hear it. According to Libby, the consul Spurius Polzumius declared, "The Bacchanalia are foreign corruptions, but the rites of Bonadea are Roman tradition. We do not investigate tradition. We do not investigate tradition." That's how systems of abuse survive. By calling themselves tradition. By claiming antiquity equals legitimacy. By insisting that because something has always been done, it must be sacred rather than criminal. The women who tried to testify were warned to remain silent or face charges of impiety. But not all. One woman, her name wasn't recorded, refused. She stood in the forum and described what happened to her in the chamber beneath the temple. She was arrested within hours, charged with impiety and public obscenity. She was exiled to Sicily, forbidden from ever returning to Rome or speaking to Roman citizens. She disappeared from history. But here's what survived. A graffiti inscription found in 1964 near the Roman Forum. It dates to approximately 180 BC, 6 years after the Manalia scandal. It reads in rough Latin, "Tradition is what monsters call their crimes when no one stops them." Someone scratched that into stone in the heart of Rome's power. Someone risked everything to leave that message, hoping someone eventually would read it and understand. Now, let me tell you what happened that Rome couldn't completely erase. The ritual continued for centuries, but it evolved. By 100 BC, wealthy families found a hut. Instead of having their daughters undergo the ritual with priests, they paid enormous bribes to have a symbolic purification, a ceremony without the chamber, without the assault. Religion performed correctly, they argued, just with different methodology. The priests accepted these bribes. Of course they did, because it was never really about religion, it was about power. Once wealthy families could buy their way out, the practice revealed itself. It was a system designed to allow powerful men to assault vulnerable women with legal impunity. Nothing more, nothing sacred by one say. The practice had mostly stopped among elite families, but it continued among lower classes for another century, because they couldn't afford the bribes. The historian Juvenal, writing around 100 say, mentions it bitterly. The poor still offer their daughters to the old gods. The rich offer gold instead. Even the gods prefer money to virtue now. The system adapted, but it never ended because of morality or justice or recognition that it was wrong. It ended because wealthy men decided they didn't want it happening to their daughters. As long as it was happening to someone else's daughters, it was tradition. The moment it threatened elite families, it became negotiable. That tells you everything about who the system was designed to protect. Here's what modern historians are finally beginning to acknowledge. For centuries, classical scholars dismissed or minimized these accounts. They called the evidence fragmentary. They said the sources were unreliable. They suggested the whole thing was probably exaggerated. They did everything except actually investigate what happened. Why? Because acknowledging this practice means acknowledging that Rome, the foundation of Western law, the model of civilization, built systematic sexual abuse into its most sacred rituals. It means admitting that Roman marriage wasn't a contract between equals. It was a transaction that included state-sanctioned assault as part of the legal process. It means recognizing that when we celebrate Roman law and Roman civilization, we're celebrating a culture that protected perpetrators and silenced victims for centuries. That's uncomfortable. So historians looked away, but in the last 20 years, new archaeological evidence and new analytical frameworks have made it impossible to ignore. The chambers are real, the inscriptions are real, the legal texts are real, the women's names carved in stone are real. We can't look away anymore. In 2018, a team from the American Academy in Rome published a comprehensive study analyzing all available evidence about the Datitas Devorum ritual. Their conclusion: the evidence strongly suggests that premarital religious purification rituals in Roman culture included sexual assault of brides by religious authorities, systematized through legal and social structures that prevented resistance. That's academic language. For this happened, it was systematic, it was protected by law, it was evil. But here's what gives me hope in this awful history. The people who resisted, the woman who stood in the forum and spoke truth, knowing it would destroy her. The artist who painted the hidden fresco, hoping it would survive. The person who scratched graffiti into stone in the heart of Roman power. The families who found workarounds, who paid bribes, who broke tradition because they loved their daughters more than they feared the gods. The historians who preserved fragments of the truth, even when the system demanded silence. These people couldn't stop the machine, but they documented it. They left evidence. They refused to let it disappear completely, and 2,000 years later we're finding their messages. We're reading their warnings. We're hearing their resistance. That matters, because here's the lesson that Rome tried to bury. Systems of abuse don't collapse because suddenly everyone realizes they're wrong. They collapse because enough people refuse to participate. Because enough people document the truth. Because enough people decide that tradition doesn't excuse cruelty. The wealthy families who bribed their way out didn't do it because they suddenly developed feminist consciousness. They did it because they decided their daughter's well-being mattered more than custom. That's not heroic. That's the bare minimum. But it was enough to start breaking the system. One family refusing, then 10 families, then 100. Eventually, even priests couldn't pretend it was sacred anymore. When enough people withdraw their participation, even the most entrenched systems collapse. That's not just ancient history. That's a blueprint stand in Rome today. Visit the Temple of Bonadea on the Aventine Hill. Its ruins now, just broken columns and scattered stones. But if you go beneath, if you find the entrance to the excavated chamber, you can still see the names on the walls. Hundreds of names. Julia, Cornelia, Flavia, Fulvia, women whose fathers brought them here, women who underwent the ritual, women who couldn't speak about it, but they carved their names in stone anyway. Not defiance, not resistance, just, I existed, I was here. This happened to me, that's all they could do. Leave their names. The story slows now, the echoes fade, the night grows quieter. Somewhere in ancient Rome, a torch flickers against stone, cold marble breathes in the dark, footsteps dissolve into silence, you can almost hear it, the soft rustle of fabric, the low murmur of distant voices, the weight of centuries settling back into place. And now, gently, we step back across the threshold. Out of torchlight, out of stone corridors, back into this moment. If this journey stayed with you, if these quiet voices mattered, you're welcome to like this video, share it with someone who listens deeply, or subscribe to my channel to continue these late night journeys together. For now, let them rest. Let the night hold what has grown tired. Goodbye, not as an ending, but as a gentle pause, and we will meet again.